Welcome back, everyone, to the podcast of the Center for Asian American Christianity. It's my delight to host a conversation with our guest, DJ Chuang, on topics related to mental health. Welcome to the podcast, DJ.
Oh, I'm thrilled to be here. Thanks for the gracious invitation, Dr. Chao.
And I love seeing you in orange because that's how I always see you. Whenever we cross paths, you are wearing some of the most distinctive and vibrant colors, and I see that on the screen this morning as well. So it's you're calling in from where? Is it California?
Orange County. That's where
Orange
we're
County.
orange.
There we go. There we go. You and I have had many conversations surrounding the topic of mental health within Asian, especially Asian Christian communities.
Mm.
Could you share a little of how you became involved in mental health advocacy within Asian American Christian communities?
Sure, I'd be happy to share. I can give you the short version or the long version, and I don't know how much time we have to talk. So let me just start. So I went to Virginia Tech for my undergrad from a traditional Chinese family, and having not talked or processed my emotions for decades, it wasn't until after seminary when all those unprocessed emotions came to surface and I had to deal with it. And the way it took shape was after 10 years of trying to be a pastor, 5 years in seminary, 5 years pastoring in predominantly Asian American churches, I was no longer able to function. And that transition out of being a pastor was very difficult, and I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. That was 25 years ago. And so that's been a life-changing event for me. And since that time, I've been good about staying on medication, getting talk therapy. I could use all the help I can get. And then from time to time, I hit stressful situations, which prompt me to readjust my lifestyle and readjust my medication. And one of the biggest discoveries of how I got involved with mental health advocacy was in 2013. So this would be 13 years after I was diagnosed. So for 13 years, my mental health condition and diagnosis was a private and heavy burden that I carried alone with a few friends and family that would know. And in 2013, a journalist found my website and blog to be interesting. And at that time, I was very active in church consulting with a nonprofit called Leadership Network, or soon after that. And I would blog about the situation that we find ourselves in as Asian Americans and Christians trying to navigate in a multicultural world, and social media and online church was just beginning. And so those were the things that I blogged about. And this journalist noticed that I also mentioned bipolar disorder, and he was gentle and gracious enough to invite me, would I be willing to share? And as a part of my story being featured in the OC Register, which is our local newspaper, it was a profile of my work, but also why I'm interested in Asian American Christian ministry and mental health. And after that, I had more opportunities and invitations to share about my mental health journey. And then I realized a few years after that every time I share my mental health journey as an Asian American Christian male, it opens more doors for ministry than when I opened the Bible. And so I've leaned more into that as opportunities arise, and as God has given me hope and healing over the years, I've become more active as an advocate.
Talking openly as an Asian American Christian man about your mental health struggles has opened up more doors for gospel ministry than the Bible. Reflect on that for me. Why? Why is that the case?
Well, having gone to Dallas Theological Seminary, I'm trained with a very literal hermeneutic. more from an engineering mind, which fit my undergrad. But I realized in my own personal and healing and spiritual journey that God created us with a whole mind and a whole body, and He desires to redeem all of that. And so I need to use both sides of my brain, and I need to process my emotions as much as I process my thoughts. And I think what has been revealing to me in terms of, well, I'll put it this way. So when normal people, listen to sermons, they remember the stories and not the theology or content. Even though the theology and biblical content is the framework about which all of life is grounded in, it comes to life through stories. And even the Bible itself, if you read it with a unbiased lens, it's majority stories. It's stories of Adam and Eve and Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and David and Solomon and Jesus and Paul and Luke and John and so on. And yet through our theological training, I'll put it that way, we've learned how to abstract all of that into theological categories. And it doesn't connect to the heart, which actually is very much a part of how we feel and live and make decisions, and is at the core of who we are, body, soul, and mind.
I want to continue on this topic of your formative experiences at the intersection of mental health and being an Asian American Christian. And you mentioned being diagnosed as bipolar. So, a couple of questions surrounding that significant diagnosis. What led you to seek professional mental health support?
Well, the very simple answer was I was in a crisis. I could no longer function. And that's often how it comes to why an Asian American person would seek professional help. And I've talked with enough therapists to know, and it's my own experience. The reality is, Asian Americans are the least likely to seek mental health treatment. That's across the board. And we're just as human as anybody else. So 20 to 25% of us as Asian and Asian Americans struggle with mental health issues. And that can range from stress, burnout, trauma, which is a part of our generational thing. The immigrant journey is traumatic, as Dr. Daniel Lee has often said, and I quote him. And then the stresses of life, whatever that may look like. And life is stressful. There are parts that are hard. Grief can trigger depression, anxiety. So those two are probably the most common diagnoses. But even being autistic and substance abuse, all of that fall under this category of mental health. And it's a huge category. And the professionals that work with it, there's so many different approaches to it. And so I sought help because of crisis, and Asian Americans are most reluctant to seek help because of their shame and stigma from our cultural upbringing. And well, reason I mentioned Asian American Christian male, those are kind of like four barriers that keep any of us, Asian because of shame, American, there's stigma in America too against mental health and mental illness. So there's plenty of those that don't seek help. And then Christians, about half of Christians think that what's called mental health is just something we can pray away and the Bible's enough. There's a whole group of Christians that have formed associations and training for biblical counseling, as if that was enough. But for some of us, it's not enough. We have chemical imbalances. We have psychological things that professional help really, really helps our healing journey, because God works through everything. And then men are less likely to seek help than women.
I just want to acknowledge and thank you for your transparency and vulnerability in talking about a very, very, very significant personal issue, the bipolar um, diagnosis. That takes a great amount of courage. So I just want to acknowledge that and thank you, DJ. I also take it as a work of the Holy Spirit in your life to give you that transparency and inner strength, because I know you well enough, DJ, that this is a topic that you're passionate about because you see others struggling
Hmm.
and you want to bring gospel-based, Christian-based, real, healing to those
Hmm.
struggles.
Yes.
You and I have had many enough conversations where I know that about you, and I just want to acknowledge that.
Thank you.
Um, you're welcome. Back in 2013, was there like blowback when this became it got written up about? Did your parents like say, DJ, why did you say this? Like, because it's the shame factor is not just individual shame, but there's communal attachments to it. So as you're able, like, was there a kind of blowback for being so public about this?
Well, I saw, uh, of course, I sought the counsel and advice of those who support me to make sure it wasn't a rash decision. And the thing about bipolar disorder, I have type 2, I have mood swings that go very high and very low. And when it's very high, I can have these grandiose ideas that I can't really pull off. I might try to pull it off and I can't sustain it. And so it was this a wild idea that I couldn't sustain and really live into. Um, but with some prayer and counsel, we felt I was ready to do that. The It wasn't so much blowback per se. It was a proud moment for people that knew me or knew of me because of that article. And at the same time, they didn't know how to talk about the mental health portion. So they would acknowledge the article. They said, "Good, congratulations on being featured," and then the conversation would stop there. However, there were some who did have mental health experiences, whether personally or with a friend or family, that would be more open to talk and share resources and share the fellowship of suffering. And I think that's the one of the most powerful things that I've experienced, that I'm able to comfort others with the comfort I've received from God. And when I go through hard times, when I know I'm not alone and I'm able to talk with someone who has gone through a similar path, it really helps me to persevere in a way that counseling or therapy or medication or family, as much as they're helpful in different ways. So we can build community around fellow sufferers. It gives all of us more strength to carry the burden together. And it is very much a fight. I'm still in that fight. Um, it's not persistent, but it does come in seasons. So sometimes it just looks like one day at a time. And so I can very much relate to those who have other struggles in life with substance abuse and recovery and addiction and grief, where all they can see is maybe the next meal or the next hour. And persevering through that is a very heavy burden, but with God's grace, we take it one step at a time. He gives us one breath at a time.
I'm taking that in. There's a profound spiritual wisdom I'm receiving from this conversation. I've not heard in a long time this phrase, fellowship of suffering. And I think sometimes our churches are gathering points for victorious living. And
Mm-hmm.
who doesn't want we all want victorious living,
Mm-hmm.
but our reality is sometimes so not that. And I
Mm-hmm.
think there's a sober realism in this image you're painting of this fellowship of suffering. And I think part of what I'm hearing through this conversation is it takes people who have experienced the comfort of God through our personal struggles to be able to extend that same grace and space to others.
Mm-hmm.
But when we haven't worked through our own struggles,
Mm-hmm.
how can we create fellowships of suffering, right? So there's this,
Mm-hmm.
the communal is attached to the individual,
Mm-hmm.
but once that individual begins to open the door in their own process, it has this cascading effect. This is the earlier point you said about when you start sharing your story, other doors open. And I see
Mm-hmm.
you nodding. You want to just comment on that?
I love the way you're exploring this because I don't have a lot of safe spaces or captive audience that wants to hear how much more this could mean. And when I've go, when I've gone through the hardest time suffering, that would be 2017. So 2000 was the diagnosis, and that was a hard time. And then 2017 came, and it was even a harder time because I was frustrated in January because I had insomnia, laryngitis, and bronchitis. So when I got well from that, I said to myself, okay, next time I'm high, I'm going to enjoy it a bit more. And the problem with that is when I am not attentive to my mood swings and I don't regulate it as much as I can, it puts me in a dangerous place. So on February 1st, I wind up in the psych ward for 3 days.
Mm.
And for the next 9 months, I'm learning to stay alive and do healthy things that would, well, keep me alive. That's a worthy enough goal in itself. And God can give more as he wills. And he did. I didn't think I would come back to my old normal, but I did. And through that journey, I I recognized a few things. Not a lot. I couldn't read. I couldn't pray. I just held on to dear life with the Lord's Prayer and Psalm 23 and taking a walk and sleeping and took a break from work. And this is a part of the Christian journey we don't hear about because it's not exactly a draw or an attraction for people that would want to hear the good news of the gospel. But in one sense, it is good news that when you are suffering, God welcomes you. God is near the brokenhearted. And part of growing in Christ is through this road of suffering. So if Jesus went through his suffering, how can we fully grow in becoming more like Christ if we also don't go through suffering? And it's not that we go looking for it, it comes through our human condition. Uh, all of us, at some time in our life, will experience grief, loss of a loved one, loss of family. All of us will experience the painful adjustment of retiring and uh, eventually coming to the presence of God. And then there's all kinds of other suffering, whether it's personal or injury or disease or whatever. And in the midst of that, the promise of God's word, and this is where I have to work hard at it, is to lean into God's word and his spirit instead of my feelings and thoughts, which are often very loud, that count it all joy, that when trials and tribulation and suffering has done its work, that we will become mature. So it's part of the maturing process. And one of the things, if your spirit and heart is discerning, you can sense a spiritual depth for those who have gone through suffering versus those who just have textbook knowledge. So, in the same way, I would say this that um, even professional healthcare givers that have been trained in psychology or psychiatry, some just have textbook knowledge, but others have personal experience, and that increases that intangible depth of empathy. So the way I would describe it, one of the greatest value of lived experience with mental health is a growing capacity of empathy. And when I'm in a room and I get to be with people, they just feel it, they sense it. And it's been a gift. It's not one that I wanted, but God's given it to me, and I've passed it along, and it's been a blessing to others.
I hear that, and I've experienced that. You are empathetic. Um, Two observations from what I've heard. One, your Christian faith gives you resources for your grappling with your very real thoughts and feelings in your head and kind of your mental health situation. I see you nodding. The second observation tied to this is your mental health struggles and your spiritual formation go hand in hand. It's kind of like you wouldn't be growing spiritually if you weren't also grappling honestly with your mental health situation, right?
Yes. I've had to receive it and frame it that way because I have nowhere else to go. So when I'm at my wit's end, I have nowhere else to go. God, Jesus alone has the word of life, and He is my Creator. He has infinite resources, goodness and mercy every day, and I and after we had a very heartwarming church revival about a month ago, and every chance they have to give prayer, I'm up there asking for hope and healing because the burden has been heavy this season. And what seems ironic is all that theological training, supposedly under a master of theology, that knowledge, so much of that knowledge is not accessible in my head. And in my heart, I'm learning, I'm relying on God in a very simple childlike faith. I think that's the best way I can describe it. I'm not ready to say that I've got so much of my faith figured out that I could write a book. Though some people have, and others who have gone through a mental health struggle doesn't mean they have to share their story openly. But I believe that's what God's given me, given my life journey. And another expression of that when I got well after my 2017 crisis is in 2018, I launched a podcast called Erasing Shame. So I'm a lover of podcasts, and that's still going into its seventh year in season 8. And we have honest conversations about being an Asian American.
This is a perfect segue. I was gonna you're the same spirit in you is working in me. Um, I know I know of you as an entrepreneur. You are an innovator. You're a strategist. You're also thinking ahead in the future of Asian American Christianity. And part of your entrepreneurial skill set involves things like creating the Erasing Shame podcast, along with this mental health directory.
Mm-hmm.
So, do you want to just talk about some of your primary projects and
Sure.
what gaps you see them filling?
Sure. So to continue my thought, Erasing Shame came out of a very simple premise. Brene Brown, bestselling author, speaker, expert on researching shame, and as she has recognized the connection between shame and vulnerability and creativity and leadership and all kinds of things, she's really taken that to the bank. Congratulations to her. And she says shame festers in silence. And so I was thinking back to Seinfeld and George Costanza, and he had an episode where he did the opposite and he got success. So the opposite of silence would be to have honest, healthy conversations. And so I pitched that on my private Facebook group. We have over 400 people I was praying for me during my crisis, and I said, hey, I would like to start this podcast where someone would be a conversational partner with me, because I don't want a podcast to be a monologue. There's such a huge relational communal element to a culture of shame and how we experience shame, especially as Asians and Asian Americans, and then with mental health on top of that. So every week, at that first season, every week would come on live and just talk about what comes to mind when you hear the word shame, and then we would talk 30 minutes about it. Sometimes be around an article, sometimes it'd be around a topic, sometimes it'd be around an expert with some specialty. But I wanted to create a space where normal people had the mic, because the experts have the mic all the time. But people with lived experiences, I believe, are also relatable to other people who may be struggling. So my simple goal is I'll keep scattering seeds out there in the internet through podcasting, and I do both the audio and video version, so it's more discoverable. And I don't have budget, and that's okay. And by scattering those seeds, if someone who's struggling at home and feels like they don't have any friends, their parents don't understand them, and they're under the weight of shame, they might come across one of our episodes, stories, conversations, and it gives them the hope and courage to get the help they need. That's a win for me. And over the years, occasionally I run into people in person. They don't leave comments on the website or reviews, but people are listening. And I've run into people, so I'll mention 2 stories that have been most recent and most heartwarming. So I'm in this Asian American missions leaders gathering in Orlando 2 years ago. There's 20 of us going around making our introductions, and everyone has a certain level of considerable influence in their spheres in the global mission world. And it comes around to me. I mention what I do as a freelance consultant, and I love networking with Asian American Christian leaders. Been doing that for 25 plus years. Mostly volunteer, sometimes as part of my work, paid work. And then this older lady in her 60s, a Korean American adoptee, lit up when I said I'm the co-founder of Erasing Shame podcast. And she was just beginning recently, a few months into discovering her Asian American identity. And she said, I listened to Erasing Shame and it's been so helpful. I was like, wow. So those
That's
stories are taking effect and taking root. And then recently at a university, actually at the University Asian American Staff Ministry Staff Conference in Irvine, where I saw you, I glanced over at somebody who was South Asian, and he had the resemblance of someone I thought I knew. And it turns out he just looked like him from a distance, but was a different guy. Not that all Asians look alike, but they were both bald. They both had the goatee. And then we got to talking, and I got to know him a little bit. And then he recognized something about me, not sure exactly what. And then we discovered that he listens to the Erasing Shame podcast, and he really appreciates it. So creating that space was pioneering in 2018. There's been others that have entered into that space, which I rejoice in, because this is such a big topic, and I think we're just starting to make headway into bringing more health into our community, and that will give us the better witness of thriving and flourishing and what the gospel can do in every aspect of life, not only church attendance.
I want to talk a little bit about churches. What do you think are some of the greatest barriers that prevent churches from normalizing and addressing mental health concerns?
Oh, that's such a big question, right? So I'll zoom out and then start zooming in. So zooming out, about half of Christians, therefore about half of pastors and half of churches, and depending on how conservative you are, that probably skews even more against psychology. I'll say it that way. So with the bias against psychology and intellectual things and academia, with that theological inertia and gravity against bringing in a holistic approach to health, that's perhaps the biggest barrier, because churches are preaching from the Bible and they're trying to garner wisdom and knowing what to do from the Bible. And the Bible doesn't explicitly talk in psychological and mental health categories, then we're likely to ignore it, even though when we look at the Bible honestly, there are plenty of examples of people who struggle with mental health, things like depression, anxiety, worry, suicidal ideation, other trauma, grief, horrendous abuse, throughout the Bible. The Bible is not a G-rated book; it's R-rated and more. But we've sanitized it in many of our churches, and we kind of cherry pick just the good stuff, and we don't address all of life, which includes mental health. So what happens in the typical Asian or Asian American church? Those who are struggling are marginalized, and church tends not to be a welcoming place, and many of us can probably relate to this, that many of our families have that distant relative that doesn't come to the family gatherings, because they're not feeling well or because they're not available. When the family members closest to them know that they're struggling with some kind of a mental health diagnosis, and because of shame, they keep hiding. And that's the second factor that's particularly unique, in the sense of there's a certain Asian flavor to how we experience shame. Shame is part of the human condition, but there's a certain flavor to our Asian and Asian American level of shame. So that would be the second huge barrier to address, or that keeps churches from addressing shame. And so what happens in the typical church, pastors do know about their congregation and their community members that are struggling with mental health challenges. And it's discussed behind closed doors. They might offer prayer. Some of the more prepared ones might have a list of counselors they can refer to for professional help. Some churches might even have a benevolence fund to subsidize some of that therapy. So those are kind of the entry-level things I've seen churches do. But beyond that, it's still a heavy burden to carry that mental health challenge by themselves. And I don't know how well people survive, but there's certainly better ways that people can survive and begin to thrive and participate in the life of church. In addition to those two giant barriers, theological and shame, there's realities of how difficult it is to access mental health resources on the professional level. So there's lack of accessibility, availability, and affordability. And by that, I mean acceptability is related to shame. It's not an acceptable thing to seek that help. Secondly, it's hard to find someone that's available. I myself, when I was in need of a psychiatrist, which are the ones that prescribe medication, it took me over 2 to 3 months of finding someone that was available. And I was on waiting lists and searching around for people in network. And then in terms of availability, then someone who's speaking an Asian language cannot find a therapist who speaks their language. Then if you can't speak the language, it's really hard to work on mental and emotional health matters. So those are practical issues that make it really hard to address mental health challenges in the Asian church community. And so 2 years ago, I was inspired to start something called Christian Asian Mental Health, specifically to help Asian American churches launch mental health ministries. So, given my background, and this is after COVID, I survived COVID, thanks be to God, without a lot of struggle. And then afterward, I was contemplating what else I could do with my life, vocationally or ministry-wise, ideally together, because I've done so much of my life of ministry and career, paid jobs separately. Could I bring it together? So I launched a nonprofit initiative called Christian Asian Mental Health, CAMH, and the website camh.network. And one of the first things I did was put together a Asian Christian counselors and therapists directory from around the country. And that's grown to over 400. Who would have thunk? There's over 400 Asian Christian therapists that value the contribution of faith in our mental health journey. And so that was very encouraging to the therapists that I found. And I just use Google like any average Joe, but I guess I have a certain way of using that. I can find a few more things than the average person. I'm not sure I can find as many things as AI, but that's a different story. Although AI is not quite comprehensive, because when we're trying to find Asian American Christian things, they're in the nooks and crannies of things that aren't exactly crawled. That's easy to diverge into. So Christian Asian mental health, I recognize with the help of a life coach that every Asian American church needs mental health ministry. So that became the focus point. And the reason I wanted to work and help churches is the other direction I could have went is, okay, maybe I'll get my master in counseling or psychology and help people one-on-one. And there's a lot of value to that. But out of my life experience, I've worked with churches. I've been a pastor. Perhaps God could use my network and my social capital there and help churches to become communities of care and compassion for those who struggle with mental health. So on paper, it looked like a great idea. I came up with a really simple model for launching mental health ministry, and I call it the 5 S's, because pastors speak in alliteration. So the first S is sermons. So pastors will address mental health from the Bible in their sermons that will stop stigma. Ed Stetzer says it very clearly, sermons stop stigma. And so we want to ground our church's approach to mental health in the scripture, which frames all our reference for truth and connection with God and with each other. Second S is stories, because stories erase shame. Stories connect us heart to heart. It makes these life situations, it humanizes the challenges and struggles. So the sermons ground us in God's truth and God's care for us. Stories humanizes the struggle and why we are compelled to be involved. Third, seminars. Seminars equip people with skills. And part of our discomfort with mental health is we don't understand it. And it is very complicated. But if churches, which bring people together, can host seminars that talk about mental health on an occasional or regular basis, then the whole community can learn together on how to deal with that and recognize when they're in a situation where professional or mental health resources can be helpful instead of waiting until crisis and things are so painful that there's consequences that you have to deal with. So wouldn't it be better to have a regular maintenance and care as part of our overall health, just like we do regular maintenance and care for our cars and our appliances? Fourth, support groups. This is particularly unique to churches because support groups can provide that place of belonging and community and help people to know they're not alone. And I've been able to experience that at the church I'm a part of. I go to a little church called Saddleback, which actually isn't little, it's gigantic. But I've been part of a mental health ministry where I literally read the workbook word for word. And our group meets on Thursday nights over Zoom, and we've been doing it for over 3 years. We've had 9 groups. And by doing just that, holding space empathetically, people have felt cared for and supported, and people have grown. And so that workbook called Living Grace is now available in English, Spanish, Chinese, and Korean to be soon launched. And it's available for free because they're donor supported. So I'm like, okay, if I can help churches find this resource, and they're not going to find it by doing a Google search because mental health isn't exactly top of mind, and you're fighting with all kinds of other mental health resources. But if I can get this one into the pastor's hand or an advocate's hand in that church, relationally, in person, because that's how we connect to each other as Asians, then that church can become that place of care and support. To move from pastoral care to congregational care. Pastors are already overworked. We see that post-COVID. And so if we can activate congregation, those who have gone through the journey of mental health, post-traumatic growth, then they can help others. And then the fifth is Sabbath. Because the number 4 wasn't great in some Asian cultures, so I needed a fifth S. And Sabbath is in the 10 Commandments. God demonstrated it. And well, we Asians tend to be overworked, so let's get a healthy rhythm of Sabbath, whatever that will look like. So those 5 S's is the model. I think it makes sense. It's easy to understand. But as I talk with churches and pastors, there's other issues that cause a church to be reluctant to just launch these 5 things because there's so many other ministries going on. There's the culture of shame. What do you do with theology? What do you do with crisis? And so many questions that we come up with when the solution itself looks easy and can be easy.
Do you have stories of Asian churches doing this at the congregational level? And if so, how do they evolve in that direction?
Asian churches have approached it this way, not so much support groups, but they will do seminars and they might do a teaching series. The S that have been more well received is something called Stephen Ministries, where they provide intensive training for one-on-one care. They don't call it counseling, one-on-one care from a biblical basis. And I'm guessing they've translated that material into Chinese and Korean and other Asian languages, or the church themselves will translate it because it's a trusted and reliable program. So that's one way I've seen Asian churches. They'll launch Stephen Ministries and provide congregational care that way with, again, the privacy, and that's a more comfortable way to deal with the shame culture. But if we don't also do things that will stop the stigma and shame, that reluctance can be the difference between terrible consequences and someone getting help. And so that's why I still push on that to say we have to address it publicly and not just one-on-one or privately. Those are good things. I don't deny that. And then the other thing I've noticed, there are a number of Asian churches as well as American churches with Asians that have launched their own counseling centers. So they've built a relationship, whether it's nonprofit to nonprofit or the church itself will hire counselors, trained licensed counselors to serve their congregation in a professional way. So they'll actually not just do lay counseling or lay care, but actually turn it professional. And one of the realities is many Asian Americans don't go to Asian churches. One statistic even says nearly 70%. And it's hard to measure. I know there's not a lot of intensive research demographically in the religious space, but let's say it's over indexed, and let's say half of Asian Americans go to non-Asian churches, defined by 50% Asian or not, and half do go to Asian churches. So I'm more concerned, and the way I've been called is I'm more concerned about the Asian and Asian American churches, because they and here's the thing. Here's the other reason, as I wrap up my thought, the other reason I want to lean into churches as the better and valuable opportunity to address the mental health need. The mental health crisis is still growing. It's not going to shrink, and there's different reasons for that. I've also been a board member of an Asian mental health collective, which is secular and digital advocacy and providing resources for people's therapy. So I'll use any means available and possible to help people as much as I have energy and availability. And the contrast there was in the Asian American community space, it's really hard to gather Asian Americans. And yet here, Asian American churches, nearly 9,000 of them around America, are gathering hundreds of Asian Americans every week. And because they gather that many people every week, that is a wonderful touch point to share the care and compassion of God in a variety of ways. Table fellowship, I know, is more common in Asian culture, but to start addressing the issues of shame and stigma and the fullness of our humanity, not only the victories, but also when we struggle and supporting each other that way, can make such a huge difference for so many Asian Americans. And out of the overflow, mental health can also become a great community outreach because resources are so difficult to find.
That's a great message. That is, I love that vision you've cast. We've touched on language barriers, which are tied to generational differences and needs with first gen who often do not speak English and have their particular cultural suspicions regarding mental health. Second gen folk like myself who were born in the US view it as less stigmatized, but some may not have direct experience having seen a therapist or gotten medication. And then there's the third gen in which it's completely normalized. Maybe they share a little too much about their mental health
Mm-hmm.
issues. I am curious how you see these Asian intergenerational differences as barriers to access versus entry points or catalysts. So here's how I'm viewing both ways.
Mm-hmm.
If the older grandma and grandpa folks are suspicious and closed to mental health
Mm-hmm.
stuff, but then their grandchildren are seeing therapists and may even be on medication, how does that back and forth look within the Asian intergenerational family as well as church? I'm wondering if you have any stories in this space.
Well, I'm going to refer to K-drama. So there's a K-drama called Daily Dose of Sunshine.
I just started watching that because
Yes.
my friend Radina recommended it to me.
Yes. It's a good edutainment experience of mental health because each episode talks about a certain diagnosis and then they act it out. And then they show you the impact, the consequences, and how you care for someone. And well, K-drama is a very compelling way to communicate. And it communicates across first and second generation. And the beauty and the complexity and the diversity of generations and individuals and families' preference or opposition to professional help is quite a mixed bag. So I've heard stories of first gen Koreans that are okay with getting medication and getting help, and their second gen people are reluctant. It's like, oh, what's the big deal about getting medication? And they're telling their kids in Korean. And so it can be reversed just from a personal mindset and exposure. One thing I found interesting related to cross-cultural things, in Asia, there's 14 countries that have Christian counseling associations in Asia. Like I said, these are Asian Christian counselors that have formed networks, and they have an annual conference exchanging and resourcing each other about how to do professional counseling and therapy in Asian nations, Asian languages, and cultures. We don't have something like that for Asian Americans in America. Not yet. But yeah, we have, great resources in terms of psychological and psychiatric training, and we're in a more multicultural context. And yet, when I talk with Asian American professionals in the mental health field, they often feel alone because the training and the associations they have are predominantly white, dominant culture. And there's a needed space for us as Asian Americans to talk about our unique and contextual issues culturally, whether it's particular ethnicity, as well as generationally. So this is a development in progress. As we just began, the conversation about intergenerational mental health is just beginning, and then part of in the therapy room or sessions, the intergenerational topic is very much something that shapes who we are from generations to generations, and affects us psychologically and relationally, because that's even more pronounced in how we form our identity in life. And I think you, at the Princeton Center, you've done several conferences that address intergenerational issues. So thank you for doing that.
To wrap it up, what words of encouragement would you offer pastors and lay leaders who feel overwhelmed by these challenges? And where can our listeners learn more about your work and available resources?
Well, I hope our conversation here has humanized that addressing the mental health challenges that are in our midst does not have to be overwhelming, and we can take one step at a time. If you don't mind calling it, even baby steps. I'm a new grandfather as of last week, so I'm very happy to have a granddaughter that's a baby that's about a week old.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And it's okay to take baby steps, because that's still progress. The first step is often the hardest. So if you, as the pastor or active lay leader or just a person in church, that you would become the advocate for your church becoming more open to addressing and caring for mental health, that will be a huge step in the right direction. And I know David is here to help. I'm here to help. And one thing I want to offer is not just a list of resources, though that can be helpful, kind of a self-serve way. It's so much more helpful when you have a person you can talk to. Not AI, not a chat bot, not a website, not a webinar podcast, but a live conversation with a real person. Whether online or in person, it just accelerates your courage and confidence that God is with you when you want to care and show more compassion and comfort people. God empowers you in doing that. And we're here to help. So my website for Christian Asian mental health, again, is camh.network. And my number is there, so you can call me, text me, email me. I blog in real time with things that I can find. And I think David will add a link in the show notes so you can just one click over to that. And then my Erasing Shame podcast is at erasingshame.com. You can find it on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, and find all kinds of stories that you can find it by topic. I don't expect anyone to listen to every episode, but some people may have. But just addressing the issues of life and how do you talk about those hard things. That's what shame is, the things that we don't talk about, but it can be helpful to talk about. And then we can become more whole in our life and following Christ in our discipleship.
That is such a positive note to end on, DJ. I want to thank you for sharing your stories with us, your vulnerability with us, for demonstrating courage and destigmatizing our shame associated with talking about our very real life struggles and how all of this is wrapped up in God's plan for our spiritual growth.
Mm.
So thank you for spending this time on this
Mm.
podcast with me today, DJ.
Wonderful being with you, David. Thank you.